Hello everyone and welcome to the latest Smart Company webinar. Communicating with your staff is the topic today. My name's Cara Waters. I'm the editor of Smart Company, and today I'm joined online by Elsa Page, who owns AMP Marketing Works, a small business. So she'll be able to give some insights into how she communicates with her staff. And we've got Emily Dash, who is the lady behind HR Gurus, and she'll also be giving us some information, but specifically from the expert point of view of human resources. So what you need to do today to participate is firstly just sit back and listen. Audio is going to be automatically streamed through your computer speakers, and you can also participate through Twitter. If you @Smart Company and use the hashtag #TalkToStaff. Finally, and probably the main way most of you will participate, is asking questions via the questions panel. To do that, you just type in your questions in the space at the bottom and click on Send. I'll then be putting the questions to the presenters from you on your behalf, so do feel free to fire away. It's a great opportunity to have some experts online here and ask them what you want. Alright, and finally, don't worry about hurriedly scribbling things down, because if you miss something, you will be sent a copy of the slides and a link to the webinar recording tomorrow afternoon. So we'll have all that information for you. And just before we get going, a big thank you to our partner for today's webinar, Business Victoria. As you can see, they're on Twitter and Facebook as well if you want to follow along. Great. So now I'm going to hand over to our presenters for our webinar, Communicating with Staff. So take it away, Emily and Elsa.
Thanks, Cara. Today we're talking about, as she mentioned, communicating with staff. My name is Emily Jack, and I'll be joined by Elsa Page, who will be giving you some insights from a small business owner's perspective. We've got quite a bit to get through, so as you will know from the content that we're going to cover today, we're looking at how to set up processes so communication doesn't get lost, communication around the tricky topics that you probably try and avoid at all costs, getting key messages across during the staff induction, the best ways to communicate to develop loyalty and build teams, how to let your staff know if they're not performing and how to praise them when they are, how to communicate change, and the importance of face-to-face communication. Okay. So the first topic that we're going to talk about is effective communication processes in your business. It's really important that you set up both formal and informal communication processes. The first one is really just having a business plan and making it visible to your staff. So you could have a scorecard. I've got clients who have vision boards on their walls, so everybody knows exactly what's expected of them on a day-to-day basis and where the company's heading. The next thing is a really simple one, is around having a job description and making sure they're kept up to date. This is around making sure people know what's expected of them, what their job is. The next one is having an induction and formal training for your staff, also very important. And finally, having a performance review process. I guess informally, there's staff meetings, which lots of businesses probably don't do enough of, or if they do, they're probably not as conducive as they would like them to be. So it's really important to use staff meetings that have an agenda. Staff announcements via email, verbally, it's really important that people are aware of what's going on. One-on-one coaching sessions are also really important forms of communication. People want to know feedback around their performance. And finally, using social media and your own internal intranet is a great way to publish communication and make sure that it's not lost. And I guess the key purpose of all of this is making sure people understand what's expected of them, what's happening in your business, and finally, what's going to be rewarded. And I guess I'd like to ask Elsa what she thinks of all these different communication processes and what works best for you and your business.
Great. Well, look, hello everyone. It's great to be here. Now, just to, look, I think it is important to communicate at different levels with your staff. Some people are very verbal, obviously. Other people like to see things written down. And I think the most important thing is to make sure that whatever's in the job description is actually then also that you've got a consistency of communication as well. But I think it depends on the size of the business. If you've got lots of people, then you probably will have a bit more written documentation. If you've only got sort of a couple of staff or maybe some part-time staff, it obviously will be a little bit more on the informal side of things. But I think it's good to have both because if you just have things that are informal, then I think a little bit can perhaps, sometimes it's not as taken as seriously as stuff that's written down. So one of the things I certainly do with my staff is I do have things written down, and then on a regular basis I'll check in with them to let them know what's been happening with the business, what are some updates, and also just to reiterate again, particularly for, say, this week, what might be the priorities for this week.
Fantastic. That's great advice. So I just want to refer to the Business Victoria website. There's an enormous amount of great content on the site, so you don't have to create these things from scratch. I know that it seems a bit scary, but they've got business planning templates, they've got job description templates, they've got advice on induction and training. They've also got a performance review process on there with some advice about creating KPIs in your business. So please refer back to that because it will definitely help you if you are starting from scratch. Okay, so another thing that we wanted to talk about today is effective induction processes. So I cannot stress enough the importance of that first day induction. Research tells us that the key reason that people leave within the first 3 months is a lack of induction. There's nothing worse than rocking up on the first day and finding that you don't have a desk, you don't have a computer, and no one wants to spend any time with you. So making sure that you're ready for that person on their first day is really, really important. You need to make them feel welcome. You need to introduce them to everybody. You need to also go through the terms and conditions of their employment, your policies, and a really good way to do that is using a staff handbook. There's actually a great template available on Business Victoria's website if you don't have one, which has the basic policies and procedures that any small business would need. Following on from that, the first week is also really important. This is where you really need to provide that on-the-job training to ensure that people know exactly what's expected of them. And if you don't have time to do it, a really great tip is to use a buddy, so allocate that person a mentor so that you can ensure that you're controlling exactly what that person needs to know to ensure that they can do their job. Finally, another recommendation to make sure that your induction is really successful is to have follow-up in place for 30, 60 and 90 days. So that means holding a review with the person, checking in to see how they're going, and then finally the most important thing is ensuring that you communicate with that person whether or not they've completed their induction or not, their probation. A lot of businesses forget to do that, but whether you give them a letter or whether you sit them down and just say, look, congratulations, your employment is now permanent, it's just about keeping those communication lines open in that first 3 months of employment. So, Elsa, as a small business owner, how important do you think induction is in terms of employees?
Sorry, I just jumped in there. What I was going to say is that, look, induction is everything because it really is the first impression. And as we know, first impressions count. So I 100% agree with what you're saying about being organised. Really, really important. If you're not, if you don't at least give the impression of organisation on the first day, sometimes that can unsettle staff. So I think it's really worth taking the time to, have a fresh desk, have everything ready for them if they're in the office, just make sure that it's all all there. And then I think a big one too is to really go through all the OH&S things. So even if you're in a home-based business, you know, that's at home, all of that thing is to show them that you actually care about them. And I think that's really important to get out there right at the front. I mean, you know, I know many staff have giggled when I show them the fire extinguisher. I just want them to know that we have it, because believe it or not, I actually did have a fire once in the office. It was a random thing, but it's really important that everyone knows how to use that. So I think that's a good thing. And if, you know, even if you might be fairly casual in the way that you are with your staff, you need to be very professional with your induction. You need to show that this is serious, that it is work, and talk through all those things in a very professional way. You can still be friendly, but you need to be professional.
That's great advice.
I just got a question there for the two of you, really, interested to get Elsa and Emily's opinion. Catherine has asked, should the staff handbook covered in the induction include all of the company's policies?
Yes, I would say that it should. It's a great time to make sure that people know what the rules are in your workplace. And I would also encourage that at the end of that you get them to sign something to say that they have read and understood all of your policies, and that will help protect you later on if there are any issues.
And I would agree. So, yeah.
Great. And Elsa?
Yeah, I was just going to say I would agree. If you've got, you know, if you've got all of that, and if you are going to be getting, you know, lots of staff, particularly if you're not going to be in easy, you know, if you're not going to be there a lot to supervise staff or just for staff to ask you questions, then I think the more that you can provide to them so that they don't feel left out in the wilderness is very important.
Yeah, I would agree, totally. There's nothing worse than someone rocking up on their first day and then they get shown their desk and then that's it. They're expected to miraculously know what their job is. The induction is about, you know, introducing them to your business, helping them to understand what the rules are for your business and how they're going to, I guess, be measured and what's expected of them in a performance perspective. It's really important that it's done formally, I would say.
Great, thanks.
Okay. So once again, I'll refer back to the Business Victoria website. There's a whole section there about induction and probation, and there's a template there for a staff handbook for a smaller business to pick up. Basically, you put in your company name and you'll be able to tailor it a little bit and have a pretty workable document straight away. All right, so I guess the big question is, why do we do this? Why do we want small businesses to communicate with staff? And the easy answer is that this is what drives performance, because it's really the way people learn. Through communicating with people, you can tell them what you want them to stop, start and continue. Secondly, it creates opportunity for professional and personal development. So it's really about providing that coaching to your staff to help them not only be better at their job, but help them develop their career. Finally, it's about communicating appreciation, praise and credit for effort and successes. So how else do people know unless you sit them down and give them a pat on the back? And it doesn't cost anything to give yourself a pat on the back and just say thank you. And I know what it feels like if someone tells me I've done a great job. Gives you a massive buck up and you go home feeling really good about your work, and that's what communication is really about. This is really about managing people well, because you're building relationships with them, you're opening that dialogue, you're improving morale, you're building teamwork, and you're setting people up for success, because if you're not doing it, how do people know what you're thinking or feeling? A lot of business owners probably get bogged down in the day-to-day and sit in their office and don't spend enough time getting out there and talking with their people about what's going on. Generally, the only time that business owners probably speak to their staff is when they have done something wrong, and they're giving them negative feedback. So once again, this is an essential part of engaging with people on a day-to-day business, so a day-to-day basis. So Elsa, I just want to get your experience as a business owner of maybe some good and bad communication or feedback type experiences that you've had.
Okay, well I'm going to talk about some good stuff first, and that is, and it's actually out of, this was not so much when I was in my own business, but when I was actually managing, volunteers, and you know, so this is people who are working for no money, and one of the things I really discovered was the importance of taking the time out to, when people arrive in the workplace, to meet and greet, say good day, catch up with them, give them a little bit of time right at the beginning. That's been a really important thing to do, and that what I found was that then, one, because I always used to be worried about all the interruptions that would happen with people constantly, you know, interrupting you, and I always found that if you spent that time initially and just check in with people, then and tell, you know, give them clear instructions and things like that, then they're less likely to come back and actually, you know, interrupt. So for me, that was a really good tip. You spend a lot of time first up with people. But in terms of, you know, providing feedback, look, I found that generally when you provide some negative feedback, it can be challenging to you. But one of the good examples was when clearly, you know, someone takes on board what you're saying and improves, and then actually, you know, is able to then go on and do work even better in the role that they had. So obviously that's a good one. A bad experience perhaps was with one of the staff that I had, and it was, look, I think the bottom line was I probably recruited badly, and that was my issue there. So really the person didn't really have the skills required for the job that I was employing them to do, and it did end in tears, which I think is every small business owner's nightmare, when, you know, the last thing you want to do is upset someone, but I think the bottom line was the realisation that about the lack of matching of the person to the job, and it was very upsetting for the person who was employed, and it was upsetting for me too. So that was, you know, that wasn't great. But then you just, you know, you work through that. You accept that for sometimes, you know, when those hard conversations, they're certainly not easy. I mean, it's like a relationship breakdown. You know, they're not easy to have, but sometimes you need to have them.
Sure. And so how did you approach that situation with that staff member? What did you actually do?
Which one, the teary one?
Yeah, yep.
Well, I was really honest. I basically just, you know, sat them down. I always think a cup of tea is always a great thing to have on hand for both people, and, you know, and just spoke very straight and just sort of explained that, look, this is sort of the expectations of the job. This is what I was expecting. This is, you know, perhaps this is the performance which isn't really measuring up to the expectations. And then I asked the staff member what they thought, and, you know, they agreed, and I guess at that time that was when the tears came too, and it was perhaps the realisation for them that, yeah, it wasn't really working out. So and so then what I did was I was just then turned into a human and not not, you know, the manager, and just sort of, you know, and allowed the person to be upset, and you know, sort of sat with that really, and then we sort of worked on some more practical things of what we could do after that.
Fantastic. Yeah, and that's a really good point. You mentioned that you were just honest with them, and that is really the key thing with feedback and communication, is that honesty. I think that a lot of the time honest feedback is quite hard to give, and it's really hard for that person to hear it, but it's the only way that people are going to learn and grow. And contrary to what a lot of people think, people actually want to hear this stuff. They want to know if they're not performing, and they want to know if they're doing a good job.
Okay, just to interrupt there with some questions that we've got coming through from readers or listeners. Lauren has a question for Elsa. She wants to know, is there ever a good way to deliver bad feedback?
Oh, good question. Look, what do I think? Oh, is there ever a good way? Look, I think there's a good way. There's better ways of doing it. You know, and again, I think supporting what Emily said, which is that ultimately deep down most people just, you know, most people know the truth, I actually think, anyway. So sometimes it can actually be a relief to just get it out there in the open. My feeling is I don't like that idea of letting someone know, oh look, we really need to have a talk, and then leaving this enormous amount of time and stress to develop. So for me it's about being kind of pretty clear, pretty upfront, making sure it's not about the person but about the situation, and probably just delivering it sooner rather than later.
Okay,
Yeah,
I think that's great. Sorry, just another one from Edwin, who says, I report to somebody who's very stingy on praise and thanks. How do you impart to your boss that a simple sporadic pat on the back is better appreciated?
I think that they should just tell them and say that they would like to hear more feedback from them, and they would like some, more information about how they're going on a daily basis. I think it's totally acceptable to manage up, I guess, is a way of putting it.
I mean, I would actually suggest that during the time that with the stingy manager is when they are giving you at the time that they're giving you some praise, I would try and, at that point say, when you do that, that makes me feel great and I just want to work harder for you, or something along those lines.
Yeah,
at the time, if you could. If that could be done at the time. So perhaps practice that one, keep it, in your pocket, and when suddenly stingies turn generous for a moment, then bring out that particular comment, and maybe then that is a nice way of perhaps letting a business owner know, oh, okay, because what they really want is they want their staff to work hard for them, and sometimes they don't know how to do that.
Exactly, that's really good advice, Elsa. I would agree.
Yeah, great tip. And we've got another tip actually from one of the people listening in, Greg, and he suggests the sandwich method, which he said is sometimes the best delivery. You say something, they do good, the bad, and then leave them on a high again.
Oh, I've actually got a slide coming up in regards to sandwiching feedback, but I might talk about that in a minute.
Okay, I'll give you one more question then before we move on. It's a question from Ruler, who says, how do you deal with a boss who has very bad communication skills and is constantly communicating confusing and contradictory messages?
That's a really tough one. I'm sure that everyone's had a manager who does this. I've had managers in the past who've done exactly that, and I used to make sure that I guess, regurgitated back to them to make sure that I was completely clear on what they wanted me to do. So if they asked me to do something that was a bit confusing, I'd say, so what you're asking is this, and then get them to further clarify. It can be quite frustrating, though, I would imagine.
Can I just make a comment here? And it is interesting. I mean, that these sort of coming from staff, and I guess for the business owners who are listening in, this is really, really important, because your inability to communicate affects your staff, and this is why I guess it's fantastic that the business owners are listening to this, because this is helping you to communicate well with staff. And sometimes it's not necessarily something that comes naturally, and many people in small business haven't had that experience of managing staff, and so I would actually encourage business owners to get some coaching in that area, because otherwise the response is what's going to happen is your staff are going to say, look, I'm finding this really hard, because to that particular listener or caller who's out there, sometimes I'd say, look, you have a go at trying to work with the manager, but sometimes it gets too hard, and that makes you want to go and look for another job. And I think this is something that small business owners need to hear.
Yeah, I agree totally. It's a really important point.
Okay, great. I'll let you keep going then.
Okay, so we were talking about the importance of honest feedback, and what we suggest for business owners is that you provide this honest feedback frequently, that you make sure that you're focused when you're giving it to people, that you don't just kind of do it in the hallway, that you're really specific, because if you're specific with your people about what they're doing right or wrong, they're not understanding very clearly what you expect of them. Make sure that if you give them feedback that it's actionable and it's in their control. Make sure that it's balanced, that it's not just all negative feedback or all positive feedback. You need to give both. make sure that you give it with attention, and make sure that it's timely. So there's no point saving up 12 months of feedback and giving it to somebody in their annual performance review. What you need to do is talk to people about things as they happen. So if somebody does something wrong, say somebody is late, you need to talk to them that day. You don't let it go for 2 weeks or save it up until they've been late 6 times. So now I'm going to very quickly go through some tips for how to give staff positive feedback or praise when they're doing a great job. And this doesn't come naturally to everybody. It's something that needs to be practiced. And sometimes managers or business owners may feel quite strange or insincere about giving people praise or positive feedback, but if you practice it and do it over and over again, I can assure you you'll get much better at it. So I've probably said this before, but be prepared. So script what you're going to say, ensure that you have an agenda and that you're ready to sit down and give that person your full focus. I've already just said that. So be generous, fair and honest when you're giving positive feedback. Don't be too over the top, but don't be stingy. Really important to give credit where it's due. Be sincere. So if you're not being sincere, your staff member will probably think, what do they want? So you need to make sure that you are sincere when you give people praise. Be timely. I've already talked about this. It's about giving feedback at the time of something happening, not waiting. This is really important, knowing when to speak privately and knowing when to speak publicly. Some people love being praised in public, whereas other people will find it quite embarrassing and they get really uncomfortable. So it's about talking to people the way they want to be spoken to. So reinforce not only results but also behaviour, so you use a balanced approach there. And really important to explain the impact to the team and business so they understand the broad impact of what they've done and how important it is. I'm now going to talk about giving negative feedback, which is probably the harder one that people probably do quite badly or probably avoid doing. So once again, I cannot stress how important it is to be prepared, especially when you're giving negative feedback. It's probably even more important that you have an agenda, that you know exactly what you're going to say. Sometimes it's worth practicing on another employee. Have really clear specific examples, because the first thing a person is going to ask is, well, can you give me a specific example of when I've done this? And if you can give them clear specific examples, it obviously has a lot more impact. And we talked about sandwiching before, but I would say avoid sandwiching negative feedback in between 2 pieces of positive feedback, because although it might soften the blow, what it generally does is it means that the person receiving the feedback will walk away only having heard the positive feedback. So they won't actually hear that negative feedback in the middle. They'll say, oh, well, I'm doing a good job. So it's really important to, if you're giving negative feedback, don't try and soften the blow. Be honest. Be really constructive. So consider your language. Focus on the behaviour and the issue, not the person. So Elsa talked about this, which is really good advice. And don't make it personal. Make it very clearly about the behaviour. Treat the person with dignity at all times. Some people really get off on giving people negative feedback. You need to make sure that you're doing it with respect and being respectful. So you're not making people feel stupid. A common thing that people do is ask people an entrapment question, and that means asking someone a question they know they don't know the answer to in order to make them feel stupid. I would really suggest that you move away from or avoid using that as an approach. Stay in control. So I would advise people to not do this when you're really emotional or upset, or when the person that you're giving the feedback to is really emotional and upset. And if a person does become upset and emotional, you should never leave the room or run away. You should stay with them, and you should try and steer the conversation and continue to explain what's going on and what's expected of them, what they need to do to improve. So if the situation needs to be escalated and you feel that you can't deal with it yourself, then I would definitely suggest to get some help. And there's lots of ways that you can do that. I'll refer back to the content on the Business Victoria website. There's some great templates there and some scripts that have been developed on some common feedback situations. A really common one is if somebody is continually late, there's another script there for if you're making someone redundant. So they will definitely help you deal with these situations. But I guess from your perspective, Elsa, have I missed anything in terms of what we need to consider when giving positive and negative feedback?
Yeah. Well, sometimes the only thing I can say is that with the way you can also give positive feedback is through a pay rise. And let them know that you're giving them a pay rise because they've done great job, great work. Now that is more looking at it perhaps on a longer period of time. So some sort of rewards, I actually think,
Yep.
Sometimes is a way. It's just another way of saying, hey, actually, we really appreciate you and the work that you've done. So that might be Christmas presents. It might be just things like that, because often, staff love that. They love that when they go, oh wow, look what they've given me, or a little, little certificates or something like that, which can be something quite thoughtful. It doesn't have to cost a fortune, and it can mean a lot to people. And the other thing I was just going to say with the tips for giving negative feedback, because everyone reacts differently to negative feedback, and some people are better at handling it. It can be confronting for people. Just wanted to say to allow time not only for the delivery of the feedback, but also to allow time for people to process it and react if they need to. So for me, it is about also making the space conducive, not having a space where other people can walk in or whatever else. And I mean, you've put in about respect the person and treat them with integrity and dignity, and I think part of that can be also just being mindful of where this is going to be taking place, and always have a box of tissues.
Yeah, that's great advice. You should always do it, do negative feedback communications in a private place where people can't see in, because if someone does get upset and they're crying and everyone can see them through the window, that's obviously very, very off-putting for people. So that's great advice. Thanks, Elsa.
Pleasure.
All right. So I guess some key tips for tricky communication situations, and these are the ones that probably small business owners try to avoid at all costs. That's when you're, maybe having to reduce staff numbers. You might be making people redundant. There might be some staff changes or department restructure. Although if you're a small business, you probably don't have a whole department, but or if there's performance issues, here's some key tips that we think are really important for these communication situations. And once again, it's about being prepared and having a communication plan. So, for instance, if you're making people redundant, you need to think about who you're going to communicate with, at what stages, and when. So having a plan to do that will alleviate a lot of your fear and anxiety around that situation. So being prepared for the hard questions. So it's really good to sometimes sit down and go, okay, well, what are the really hard questions people are going to ask me are, and having an answer prepared, and that will make you feel a lot more comfortable going into those situations. And once again, be honest. Honesty is best policy at all times, and don't tiptoe around around people's concerns. Tell them the truth. So be open and communicate and involve your people in any decision making. This is really important, that you involve staff in coming up with solutions. They're most of the time closest to the situation, and they'll probably have the best solutions to these problems. So they'll also be really much more likely to accept what's going on if they're involved in the decision making process. So basically, finally, we would like to say be prepared for the fallout, have answers ready to allay fears, don't run away, stay with your people and they'll respect you even more. And once again, I'll refer back to the Business Victoria website. There's some great content there around dealing with employees in downturn. So just to recap on everything that we've been talking about, communication is a key part of being in business, because people work for people. And so business owners, this means you. So your people work for you. So it's really about making sure that you communicate with your people every day about everything. The rule of thumb here is that there's never too much communication in my book. So people want to know what's going on. If you don't talk to them, they're going to find out through the grapevine. And if you are the one in control of the messages, then you're going to have much better outcomes. Okay, so communication is directly linked to retention. And the reason for this is it's about engaging with your people and involving them in what's going on in your business every day. There's no use sitting in your office and working away and not engaging your people to help you take your business forward. So communicating with people is obviously going to help them understand how they fit into the bigger picture. And so I guess I'd like to ask all business owners, how much time do you really spend talking to your people, and do you think it's enough? So Elsa, how much time do you spend talking to the people in your business?
Well, I'm going to have to be really honest here and say probably like every business owner, I could spend more time, but partly that's because there's always this conflict between the time that you spend with your staff versus the time that you spend yourself working on or in your business. And sometimes there's a conflict. Sometimes we think, oh, you know, it's all this time's getting away from me that I'm spending on my staff, and you feel like it's a waste of time, which is really incorrect. So I guess I just want to acknowledge all those business owners out there who perhaps feel that as well, which is like, oh, I feel like it takes up too much of my time to manage staff. Look, the bottom line is it does take up time. However, you know, the time that you actually do invest and spend with your staff will come back in spades. The whole point of having staff is to kind of help you get out of your business so that you can work on it rather than in it. And, you know, you need to invest for this to happen. And I've certainly seen business owners who haven't spent the time. You know, it means then that often it's quite inefficient, staff haven't got the direction, and then you end up sort of wasting a bit of money and energy on that. So for me, it is a bit of a struggle, but I make sure that I am organised and spend time to organise what I want the staff to do and to check in to see how they're going, because what I've found is if I don't do that, it is inefficient. And so even though I feel like I'm wasting time, I'm not. It's actually an investment.
Yeah, and that's great advice. Talking to your staff is investing in your business, and it is quite difficult at times, but it's definitely worth it in the end. So the next question, I guess, is do you really know your people and do you take the time to listen? So it's not just about one-way communication, it's about talking to your people, getting their input, involving them in what's going on. It's really, really important to do that. And I think Elsie mentioned that in the way that you do communicate with your staff. So the whole purpose of communication is to make sure that people understand what's expected of them, and if you do all of these things and you invest the time, you're going to make sure that your people are going to stay with you. And if they don't, they're going to get disengaged. We've heard some stories about the managers who don't talk to their staff and the impact that it has on morale. So I'm just going to talk very quickly about why people stay in the business. And the first reason is around empowerment and trust, and the way that you do that is through communication. The second one is around manager relationships and loyalty, because people work for people. So unless it's really important that as a manager you spend the time talking to your people, giving them feedback when they're doing a great job and when they're not doing a great job, and this will help retention. It's about ensuring that people understand the bigger picture, and this will help engagement levels, and ensuring that people want to contribute to the success of your business, and that's what communication is all about. So better results are underpinned by feedback and recognition. I think that we've made that pretty obvious. So it's really simple. Please go forth and talk to your people every day about everything. So just before I summarise what we've talked about today, Elsa, I just wanted to ask you, is there anything that you think we've missed, or if you had one top tip that that you could give business owners out there about communication? Not only are you a business owner, you're also a communication expert working in marketing. What would it be?
Okay, well I think the big one is not to assume that your staff understand what you've communicated. In other words, you need to check in that there is an understanding. One of the things that has sort of come up while we've been talking that I've been thinking about is many businesses I speak to, sometimes their staff are very passionate and excited and very committed, but they might be putting their energies perhaps into the wrong areas, and so they're actually going off on a slight tangent to perhaps what they're meant to be doing. So I think that's probably a big thing, is really just checking in to make sure that the staff is very clear on what you expect of them and what you want them to be doing. And so then that needs to be done on a regular basis, because if it's not, they can send, they can be working, thinking they're doing a great job, but it's in the wrong direction. And sometimes business owners don't want to always pull back the reins, but you need to, and ultimately the staff will thank you for keeping them on track, so that you set them up to win as an employee rather than set them up to fail because they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing.
That's great advice. So how would you do that in your business? Like, do you have monthly staff meetings, or do you do it more informally?
Look, I pretty much have my system is that whenever staff come in, because I have a lot of part-time staff as opposed to full-time staff, I really do a check-in. I actually give them a bit of an up-to-date on what's been happening in the business, because I'm sure, like many other business owners, gee, 1 week in small business, a lot can happen. So it's a case of really bringing them up to speed, and sometimes, we do change direction because we can, because we're flexible, we're small, and we are able to, adapt to the market. So I bring them up to speed, and then sort of relate how perhaps the changes in the business might then affect what they've been doing. And I, reiterate exactly, well, you were working on this, this is now no longer such a priority, so I'd like you to work on this, or whatever it happens to be. So I give a bit of a rationale for perhaps a change of direction. And I do that every time, because I've just learned that if I don't, sometimes, whilst I think it's all clear, I think I've, been the perfect communicator, the message hasn't got across. So I also go through a bit of we almost do a daily, sort of what are we going to do today? So that it's all very clear, and so that staff, if I'm out and about and not here all the time, they've got something written down that they're very clear that this is what's to be done.
Yeah, that's great advice. Thanks, Elsa. So I guess in summary, having the right communication processes and systems in your business is really, really important, and whether they're formal or informal, all of these tools will help you better manage what's going on, making sure people know what's expected of them, when they're performing and when they're not. So whether it's a performance review process, an induction process, your staff manual, or whether it's just a general email announcement, it's really important to have these processes in place. I've said this about 10 times, I think. Being prepared and having an agenda is key to successful communication. Be ready for the hard questions, and don't hide and don't shirk away from situations where you know there's going to be conflict or it's going to make people uncomfortable. You are the business owner. You need to step up to these situations and manage them head on, otherwise it'll just come back to bite you in the end. Practice makes perfect, so once again, doing this every day, you're going to get better and better at it. It might feel a bit funny to begin with, but if you keep doing it all the time, it's obviously going to get easier and easier. Choose the right type of communication for the situation, so whether it be an announcement or a letter or whatever it needs to be, you need to make sure that your communication is tailored to the outcome. Finally, face-to-face, we would suggest is always best. How many times have you sent an email to someone and things have got lost in translation? Things have been taken out of context. It's a lot better to just, walk over to the person's desk and tell them face-to-face, or even pick up the phone. And I think that that's really about it. So basically, go forth and talk to your people.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Elsa and Emily. We've got a lot of questions, that, so encourage you to keep on sending them through, and I'll put as many of them as we have time to to the pair. So first of all, we've got a bit of an interesting one from Michael. He says, this is the age-old showstopper, how to deal with a staff member, female, who has BO.
Okay. Yeah, this is a tough one, and it is a situation that I've had before. So my advice would be I would get another female to speak to her. It might be a little bit confronting if a male sat her down and gave her some feedback, but I would sit down and just explain to her about personal hygiene and the importance of personal hygiene, and very gently suggest that she needs to wear deodorant.
Could I add to that? I would also, in the staff bathrooms, I would actually provide deodorant and sort of have it there, and just with a little sign, sort of like, you know, something sort of
Keep
alluding
fresh.
to, yeah, keep fresh. I like that. There we go. Yeah, or something along the lines. I mean, if humours, well, yeah, it's probably better to just keep it straight, really.
Okay, so some sweet-smelling tips there. We've got another question from Melissa. She says, how do you deal with a staff member that ignores or disregards negative feedback?
Yes, this is a common one. I guess if someone ignores negative feedback and it's having an impact on their performance, you may need to escalate that to a more formal performance management process, where you would give them warnings for failure to improve. So, you know, it may be that you need to sit down and formally go through things, put things in writing, and let them know what the consequences are if they don't improve their behaviour. Because if there are no consequences, then generally people won't change and they will disregard it.
Okay, a bit of a practical issue from Scott. He wants to know whether there are any tools or software that can help with task management on an ongoing basis.
Task management as in like a project management tool or a...
I'm not sure. Scott hasn't given further details if he wants to send through more, but perhaps if you can guess for now.
Yep. I'm happy to just say, look, seriously, even just, you know, Microsoft Outlook, if you're on PC, just the tasks list can be a ripper, you know, something like that. Or if you're on Google Docs and you actually have a sort of just even a manual sort of, you know, who's doing what. I mean, that just keeping it really simple can be a very good way of, you know, just keeping a bit of a track of it. It's not anything sophisticated, but it's there and available to most businesses.
Okay, and we've had a tip from a listener, Michael, who says Trello is a great free browser task management software. Trello, he says.
Oh, good on you, Michael.
Fantastic. There you go.
So we've got another question from Kate. She says, coming in as a new manager to introduce and develop new systems, how do you go about introducing those to existing staff to get them on board and view them as positive, not negative?
Sure, I guess this is really around change management, and the first step in change management is helping people to understand why you need to change, and I guess the whole thing around what's in it for me is a good way to do that. So involving them from the very beginning in a new project, getting their input, helping them, getting them to help me come up with solutions will enable them to I guess, more easily accept what's going on is my best advice.
And I'll just add to that by also, you know, talking with the staff and finding out a little bit about them and what potentially might be their barriers to the change, and being really honest about that. I think acknowledging, you know, because with change there's always some, you know, negative sides as well as some positive sides. So I think it's about being, you know, open and honest and acknowledging the negative, because sometimes when we bring in change we just keep trying to, you know, promote the benefits of it, but people, you know, people in their mind know the negatives. So sometimes by just getting those out of the way, acknowledging them, then you really can move forward to some of the positive stuff.
Okay, that's great, Elsa. Now I've got a question from Melissa. She says, how do you deal with a staff member that ignores or disregards negative feedback?
Did we already have that question?
I think I was going to say, I think we answered that
Sorry,
with another one of the
I'm
things. That's okay.
I'm repeating myself. Okay, that's all right. We've got lots more here to go. We've got a question from Leo. He wants to know, are team rewards appropriate as well as individuals?
Yeah, I would definitely encourage team-based rewards. You could come up with an incentive program that rewarded the whole team, not just individuals. I think that's a great way to build that sense of team, ensure that people are all aligned to the outcome and to your business strategy. So I would definitely encourage that.
Yeah, and I would agree. As long as they're, as long as the team is working together to achieve a goal, because sometimes I think it can backfire when there's sort of if certain people are working really hard and then there's a generic reward across the company, based on a few people's kind of performance. I think that's when it can backfire.
Yeah, I totally agree. It needs to ensure that everybody is engaged and rewarded for whatever the incentive is.
Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. And Josie wants to know, how do you manage staff that don't directly report to you, however you've been asked to manage them by your direct report regarding projects when the direct manager is not there?
That's probably a common issue, and that's, I guess, really around influencing people and I guess having the skills to try and get people on board with projects when they're not necessarily your employee. It can be quite difficult. Maybe they could speak to the person's manager and ask for help to getting that person to help them with that project. It's a bit of a tricky one, really. Elsa, what do you think?
Well, the only thing I'm thinking is that whoever has got the authority needs to endorse the role that they're putting you into. And even though they're sort of saying, well, look, they don't have to directly report to you, but that, I think they just need to re-clarify what they're actually expecting from both staff members in that situation, rather than just throw it on to the, someone who's the subordinate and say, sort it out. I don't think I don't think that's fair. So I think it's about re-communicating. If the position has changed so that there's a different reporting structure or there's a different accountability structure, whatever, that needs to be communicated by the person who ultimately has the responsibility.
Okay, that's helpful. And Sharon wants to know how to deal with, so it's quite simple from Sharon actually, but tricky. How do you deal with staff who don't get on?
How long is a piece of string? I guess that's a really tough one. Sometimes you may need to get those two staff members into a room and do a bit of a mediation session to say, okay guys, let's talk about the issues here. If you're upset with each other, what's going on, and try and get them to agree to disagree or agree to work together. I found in the past sometimes that works, but I guess the two people need to be willing to do that. If it's about behaviour and people behaving inappropriately, I guess you need to deal with that separately.
Yeah, look, I'd have to agree with what Emily's saying. The only thing I'd add to it is about identifying, is it just a personality clash, or is there sort of some behaviour that one of the parties is doing that is unacceptable? It's sort of identifying what's going on there. Some team building can always be a good thing, social functions, something outside the office can be good, when you might want to get someone in who can run some of those, because that's often proven to be very, very effective. But look, at the end of the day, I think it is really important. I know that there's two sides to it. One is, having diversity can be fantastic for problem solving and things like that. But in small business, having a personality clash, if it's a small staff, it's a nightmare. So I think sometimes you almost need to perhaps be really upfront to both of them and say, look, this is a bit of a nightmare. And it's putting the business in a bit of a tricky situation. So have you got some solutions for how we can work through this? Yeah. Anyway, And I could go harsher, but I won't.
We've got a tip here from one of our listeners, Michael, and he said he's actually had an excellent result in a situation where the business culture included a large amount of interpersonal conflict between staff, and what he did was get a professional trainer to assist with, and had excellent results in cultural change, and was assisted with funding through the Enterprise Connect and also Skills for Growth.
Well, there you go. Brilliant.
Yeah, so that's a good tip. I'll give you a final question here. Martine says she thinks she communicates quite well with her staff, and when she asks for feedback it's always rather positive, but she still continues to have some recurring issues. How does she really know if it's the way she communicates or if the staff are just not listening?
That's a good question. I guess a tool to get some feedback from her staff may be a 360 review. So she may, if she's a small business owner, be able to engage a consultant to come out and do a 360 review process so she can get some balanced feedback. A lot of the time, if it's your manager, it's quite scary to give them really honest feedback because you're worried about the implications of giving that feedback. So to use a 360 review process, you can get that feedback in a confidential manner where people will feel more comfortable in doing that. But if that's not an option because it might be too expensive or it's just not something that can be done, I would encourage her to be more direct with your staff and say, I want you to give me the feedback and I'm not going to get upset when you do so, and give them permission to tell her the truth.
I was just going to say that another way that, say, we do with marketing is when you really want to know what your customers think of you, is usually what does work is you get an independent person to ring up and have a confidential discussion, and then later on you may ask the person, is it okay if this information is fed back without revealing name, or is it okay if it's fed back revealing name? And often what can happen is when that is initiated by the business, it's incredible how people are then just going, oh wow, they really want to improve this, how they then will perhaps provide honest feedback, and then what can happen is it can be delivered to the business owner in a way that can be heard without the staff actually having to deliver that themselves.
Yeah,
okay,
that's a good idea.
Yeah, it sounds like there's a few solutions to that one, so good luck, Martine. All right, well that's all the questions we have time for, although there will be a chance if you want to turn to Twitter and using the hashtag #TalkToStaff to ask a few more questions. But for the webinar section, I'd just like to really thank everyone for participating. Thanks for all your brilliant questions. That's really been really insightful, and thanks to our partner for today's webinar, Business Victoria. You will have seen a few links up on the screen during the seminar to the Business Victoria website, so I'd encourage you to go and have a look at that. There's a lot of information on there, and when you get your slide pack, you can just click through to those links and find more information on some of those issues. So thank you very much. Thank you obviously to Elsa and Amy for sharing your expertise, and to everyone for joining in on another Smart Company seminar, and we'll have details of the next one coming up. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.